The trade deadline rumors are swirling, but is any of it worth a dang? Let's talk about it on the Locked On Vikings podcast.
Ooh-wee! You are Locked On Vikings, your daily Minnesota Vikings podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome, everybody, to another episode of the Locked On Vikings podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. As always, I'm your host, your pal in the kid you copied off in math class. My name is Luke Braun. You can find me on Twitter at Luke Braun NFL. Show is on Twitter at Locked On Vikings. Thank you so much for making Locked On Vikings your first listen of the day. Locked On Vikings is on Amazon Fire. It is on Roku. Just download the Locked On Minnesota Sports app. And today we have a very special guest we're going to talk to for most of the show. Carmen Vitali of Fox Sports covers the NFC North. Figured this being the last bye-week podcast where we don't have, like, we're going to talk about the Cardinals tomorrow and on Friday. This is kind of the last free moment that we have. Let's check in on all the other NFC North teams. We've already kind of talked about how good the Vikings odds are. Most odds makers and projection models and stuff agree somewhere around 90% to win the NFC North right now are the Minnesota Vikings. But let's check in because there's some interesting stuff going on in Green Bay, interesting stuff going on in Chicago and Detroit, and always good to keep an eye on your greatest enemies. Keep them closer, right? And Carmen's perfect for that. So we're going to talk to her. But first, there's some trade deadline stuff. So this happens every trade deadline. There's always some rumor that goes around. There's always some sort of conjecture. There's teams like the Panthers that want to sell everything. Maybe the Broncos are doing that. Maybe the Colts are doing that. There's always stuff you want to go pluck at. Always way less than you think will happen. We've already had one big blockbuster. That was Christian McCaffrey. That's already outside the norm for a trade deadline. So there's that. But also, you always will start to get some rumors of, 8 teams were involved, including the Vikings. What I've been seeing a lot is that the Vikings are making phone calls. Well, of course they're making phone calls. It's the trade deadline. It'd be weird if they weren't making phone calls. But I don't get the sense that there's any real steam on anything. Just that they're exploring some conversations. And if there is real steam, it probably will have to come later. Now, the trade deadline itself is in November, so we're getting to it. It's November 1st. That's Tuesday at 4 Eastern, so 3 Central. That is the actual trade deadline itself. So anything that gets done kind of should start to happen this week. And you kind of get one more game and then probably a flurry of action on Monday or not. Sometimes the trade deadline passes and there's just nothing. Pretty sure that happened last year. There was just maybe a couple of low level, 6th for a 7th and a guy kind of trades. But that's about it. And my stance on the trade deadline is that unless something really, really fun comes along, like something really too good to pass up, be opportunistic, but don't chase it, I guess would be my trade deadline strategy for the Vikings if I were in charge. I just don't think that they're in a position where they need to go make some big splashy move and go get somebody like Brandon Cooks, right? That was one of the names. Darren Wolfson had a couple of little nuggets, but they were all very wishy-washy. They're kind of calling. They've spoken to some of these teams, and one of those teams was Houston, and then you go, ooh, Brandon Cooks is in Houston. Maybe they're selling. But that's you have to do some conjecture just to get to Brandon Cooks's name. Let alone whether or not there's any steam there. And that's not, I don't think, the move that is feasible for the Vikings. Now, that would be cool as heck. I would be so into it if the Vikings got Brandon Cooks. I have sort of solidified in my opinion that you can't have too many wide receivers. Look, you can't have the same 3 guys on the field every single 11 personnel rep, and that's kind of what the Vikings are doing right now. You get 5 snaps a game for Rager, and that's about it. You guys just get tired that way. You need to rotate them more than that. There's a lot of sprinting when you're a wide receiver. You need to be able to rotate guys more than that. So, at the very least, somebody for that, but also put 4 receivers on the field if you go get Brandon Cooks, right? The redundancy there is not the issue. But you're going to have cap stuff, and Brandon Cooks is, I believe, in a contract year. Oh, nope. I'm thinking of Bradley Chubb. Bradley Chubb is in a contract here. He is also somebody that is rumored to be on the block. He has like a 12-ish million dollar contract that you're or 12-ish million dollar cap hit for the Broncos this year. One thing to remember when you're trading for players is in mid-season, however many games have already elapsed, you do not incur the costs for those games. So we don't pick up all $12 million. We're in week 8 now, so you would be only paying for the last 10 games of the season. So you'd only pay for 10/17 of whatever that would be if you traded for him like today. And if you trade for him at the deadline itself, it's 9/17. Um, so you'd only pay like 6.5, I think, million for Bradley Chubb, right? Brandon Cooks is a little bit of a different thing because he has other money on his deal. There's a lot of roster bonus that would not travel. The Texans would just eat that. But he would actually only cost like less than $1 million on this cap. So it actually would work, but you would take 18 million fully guaranteed next year. And then 2024, he also has a roster bonus of $3 million plus 13 million in base salary. So he would be a fairly expensive proposition for the next 2 years, but he would be pretty cheap for this year. Talk about it. That actually works out okay. But you would need to make a lot of space next year. That would put you behind the 8 ball quite a bit for 2023 and 2024. And of course, I mean, Brandon Cooks is a good player, so it would cost you some draft capital as well. Some other interesting names that were brought up. The Broncos feel like they're having a fire sale. So there's like KJ Hamler, Jerry Jeudy. People have been speculating that Jerry Judy's on the trade block pretty much all year. It would be very funny to just like collect another 2020 wide receiver. um, that's part of it. There was, I think, a PFF article that suggested Kawon Williams, the slot corner in Denver. That is a probably much smaller move. They said it would be for like a 5th-round pick, and we don't have a 5th-round pick, but we're probably getting a compensatory 5th-round pick. So it would be like a conditional 5th that turns into a 4th if you don't have it or however that works out. But that kind of thing, a day 3 pick for a guy. I'm in favor of a lot of these moves. Don't get me wrong. I just don't think that they're in the cards. And I think if the Vikings don't do anything on the trade deadline, that's a perfectly responsible option that I'm pretty okay with. But most of this show is going to be a conversation about what's going on in the other division teams because, hoo boy, it's rough out there. It is a rough time. Maybe they just didn't hire right. And if you are going into a hiring cycle here, as it is the fall, maybe you can put that thing on LinkedIn Jobs. In fact, you really should put that thing on LinkedIn Jobs. It is super easy to create a free job post on LinkedIn Jobs. Hiring can be such a nightmare to sift through all of the resumes and nonsense. It's just such a high volume problem. And it's so hard to sift through it all, but the screening questions and other tools that LinkedIn has makes the process so much easier. Plus, their huge network can help you find the right person to help you finish this year strong. So LinkedIn Jobs can help you find that qualified candidate that you want to talk to faster. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedonnfl. That's linkedin.com/lockedonnfl to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. This episode's also brought to you by Bird Dogs, who just launched a new line of sweatpants. Bird Dogs makes all kinds of extremely comfy stuff, shorts, for the warmer months, good golf pants for late fall golf if you're still trying to sneak in a few rounds after work. I know some of you love to do that. And of course, they're super, super comfortable, soft, cuddly little sweatpants. Go to birddogs.com and enter promo code LOCKEDON. They'll throw in a free Bird Dogs rope hat. That's birddogs.com, promo code LOCKEDON, and boom, a free Bird Dogs rope hat with your pair of Bird Dogs. The most comfortable shorts, pants, and sweatpants with built-in liners. You will not take these things off. All right, here with Carmen Vitali of Fox Sports, covers the NFC North, which I honestly didn't know that Fox Sports had people covering divisions like you would cover like a college conference.
Yeah,
But it's a thing.
it's a brand new staff actually for this year. So I was one of the original hired.
Cool.
We actually haven't hired every single division quite yet. But yeah, it's really exciting to kind of be part of something new while still being part of a giant company that it has the stability of the Fox brand. And I've
Right, you
got,
got the name.
yeah, you got the name, you got the stability, you know that it's not going anywhere, but you get to kind of build something. And I love my editors. They're fantastic. And all the people all the guys that I work with, they're doing such good work over there on foxsports.com.
Awesome. So yeah, everybody check that out. I would like to pick your brain about the rest of the NFC North. We talk about the Vikings a lot here on the Locked On Vikings podcast, but we got some division rivals that we could check in on here while we don't have a game to break down since the Vikings were just on bye. So let's talk about the Green Bay Packers a little bit. How's it going over there?
Yeah, it's one of those things too with the Green Bay Packers and Aaron Rodgers. You're like, they're gonna figure it out, right? They're the Green Bay Packers. They always do. Like I would be a fool given all of the previous material that we have to look back at, to think that they're not going to turn this around. But I think this week, especially when you just didn't see any tangible improvement week to week, and you haven't seen any tangible improvement week to week, and they're riding a 3-game skid, that you're like, are they gonna turn it around now? And I don't
Yeah.
have the answer for that. And I don't know that no one seems to be on the same page.
It feels like we've seen that so many times, and I feel like every time it's always come from this sort of calming Aaron Rodgers presence, the RELAX thing, the run the table thing. Like those turnarounds have, and now he's like calling out his players and saying maybe we should bench some guys. Like that is not the vibe.
I mean, that's kind of what I wrote about after the game this past Sunday. Was I think all anybody wanted to hear out of Aaron was, this is on me. I'm going to figure it out. I am taking accountability and responsibility for my part in this. Because, I mean, he hasn't played like the Aaron Rodgers that we know. And there's a lot of contributing factors to that. His offensive line is in flux for the first time. He can't trust those guys right now, and his protection right now. He's throwing to really young receivers who just don't have the experience to, change certain routes or their leverage based on where the defenders are on the field and if they come open. And Rodgers likes to go off script. Well, you can't do that when you're not on the same page as your receivers. So like he's working through all of that. But again, I just feel as though when you're the quarterback, especially when you're an 18-year veteran, whether or not it's actually your fault, you say it's your fault. Like that's kind of part of what being a leader is. And we haven't seen that from him at all. And yes, he's gone so far as to say, we have double-digit mental errors. He said that it takes the players to fix this, but it almost seems like he means it takes the other players.
Because he's not the players. Yeah.
He's not part of that, apparently, even though he's saying those things, because he's saying that they have double-digit mental mistakes, and in the same breath saying that his quarterback's coach graded him out the highest he's graded him all season this last game on Sunday. So I'm like, all right, that doesn't really sound like you're like in the trenches with these guys. And I think that's what at least fans want to hear. I don't know, if he's having these meetings that we all don't know about, and he could be the most encouraging, supportive teammate behind the scenes that we don't get to see. But what he's portraying publicly, which can't be discounted because players are going to hear that, people are going to hear that, fans hear that, is not a really great message, I don't think.
Yeah, we've seen plenty of stuff like that around the league, and I feel like it rarely comes out later that, he was saying all the right things behind the scenes.
Right.
So let me ask you this, point blank. Is it Aaron Rodgers' fault, or does he have a point?
Oh, I definitely think he has a point. Don't get me wrong. This team is just, and I'm not exactly sure. I'm always the one to point to I look at the offensive line first for any offense.
Okay.
And if there's issues there, which there are with the Packers, I tend to think that explains a lot more of, they can't get a run game going. Aaron Rodgers doesn't have the protection. He also isn't as willing, I feel like, to scramble and to do the things and to be as mobile as perhaps he was 3, 4, 5 years ago, because, he's 39 years old. That starts to wear on you a little bit more. Maybe he wants to stay in the pocket a little bit longer because he is holding the ball a little bit longer this year. And I think it's to give his receivers time to catch up with him. And again, he doesn't have, I think the closest thing to a safety blanket was probably Randall Cobb. And now Randall Cobb's out. and he doesn't have a consistent cast of characters around him, and he definitely doesn't have that one guy that he knows is going to catch things regardless of if it's a good ball,
Right. The
if he's in
Jordy,
coverage, anything like that. He doesn't have that guy, and I think that you're seeing what happens when he doesn't have any sort of safety net. And that's on obviously Goody, that's on, and I think it's partially also on Matt LaFleur, the play calling. I don't know how much.
And Rodgers has personnel power too. It's on him.
Right. I mean, like, you think that he has someone, and he has autonomy over play calling too. He, like, him and both Matt LaFleur and Aaron have talked about how they have this kind of working relationship where even on the field, when he's got options every single play that he can check to, or he can change the play. He pretty much has that autonomy. So it's one of those things where, again, you want the credit when things are going well, but then you have to take the blame whether or not it's just you. But I do think that, like, part of it is him. And I think, again, I talk about this with the Bears all the time. It's not one thing. When things go this wrong, it's not, you can't blame it on one person or even one unit. It's a lot of things. It's a slew of things. And it's going to take all of those things working together again to fix it. But I think that as a quarterback, you need to be the one, even if it's not your fault, even if you do have a point, to say, no, this is on me. We're going to figure it out.
Fall on it.
Right.
Yeah. And I guess, yeah, fall on the sword. I guess with our perspective, since we're Vikings fans here on Locked On Vikings, the world, I just laid this out and like talked it out a couple days ago on this show. The world where the Vikings don't win the NFC North, the most likely scenario that I can think of where that happens looks something like the Vikings going like 500 from here on out, the Packers turning around and only losing 2 more games. And that does not feel very likely, but that's the best I could figure out.
Yeah.
So help me find that scenario. What does that look like? What needs to happen in Green Bay for them to turn it around and go like 7-2 for the rest of the season?
They're going to have to deviate from everything that they've done traditionally, I feel like, on offense.
Easy, simple.
Like, yeah, exactly. Like, you're gonna have to get outside your comfort zone. And we can talk about this too, because I think the Bears did a really good job of that last night. And I gave Kevin O'Connell a lot of praise last weekend against the Dolphins for his in-game adjustments and kind of veering from what he was comfortable with because of what Miami was doing to them. And that's what it's going to take. Like, you can't just keep rinse and repeating the same thing when you don't have the same personnel. It's not the same situation year in, year out. You're going to have to evolve this offense a little bit more. And if Aaron doesn't want to get hit, but he also wants to stay in the pocket a little bit more because he doesn't want to scramble, that's going to look very different. And maybe you are going to have to lean on your run game. I think that's probably the biggest thing with the Packers right now is you just don't need to ask Aaron Rodgers to be Aaron Rodgers right now. You need to get Aaron Jones and AJ Dillon way more involved. You have this tandem, arguably the best tandem in the league as far as running backs go. They are good at different things. You can use them in all sorts of situations and put them both on the field at the same time. That's worked when the Packers have done it this year. And I can't for the life of me figure out why they're not doing it more. And again, I get that it comes with the protection. The offensive line is in flux, but throw your tight ends out there. Protection isn't just the offensive line.
Right.
You put more
There's
ways, right? You put more tight ends. You put multiple tight end sets out there. You help them, help the line. You put an extra blocker out there, go jumbo. Any of those things to get this ground game going while you figure out exactly what you can and can't do with these receivers. The problem is, I think it might be too late for that.
Like, yeah, there's like no margin for error anymore.
Exactly, because people have tape on you. People know the tendencies. People know what your issues are. The time to figure all that out was the first 4 weeks of the season before anybody's comfortable with whatever you put on film yet. So now it's going to be an uphill battle from here on out. So to your point, I see the Vikings winning this division. I said it before the season even that I thought that was a really strong possibility.
That's a good victory lap because that was not likely. Now it's like 90%. But take your lap. Very good.
Yes. So I actually have the Vikings in the Super Bowl.
Whoa.
Yeah.
Okay. We're going to circle back to that later. I love it. All right. Have you ever heard of Prize Picks?
No.
Let me tell you about Prize Picks. Prize Picks is, think about like daily fantasy, like DFS, where it's not a fantasy league where you're drafting, but you kind of just can buy into players for a game. But instead of putting together a whole lineup and trying to win in a pool with like 6,000 people, it's you versus the house. You pick like 2 to 5 players. You don't have to put together a whole lineup with the flex and 2 quarterbacks or whatever. More than or less than. That's all it is. And if you go to prizepicks.com or download the Prize Picks app, you can get a 100% deposit match up to $100. It means you put in $100, get $100 slapped right on top of it, put in 50, get 50, and so on. And that is with promo code Locked On the Prize Picks app or at prizepicks.com. Carmen, I want to move on to the other teams here in the North. I wanted to spend a little more time on the Packers because they're the only ones with like any genuine season going on right now. Yeah. The Bears, I mean, hilarious. Maybe I shouldn't say that. The Bears are 3-4 now. They have the same production as the Packers and the same record as the Packers. They have probably just about as good a chance as the Packers. The Lions are pretty out of it, but let's start with the Bears, who still do have a prayer of a season, I think, even though I still am not giving them a lot of credit because I don't see them having the turnaround in them that, like, maybe Aaron Rodgers can do it. Aaron Rodgers has done it. I don't see the Bears ripping off 7 wins here. No. So I guess I want to start with the same question. What has to happen?
More of what they did on Monday night. And that's the only really encouraging, or the really encouraging thing. I shouldn't say the only really encouraging thing, but the
like 100 rushing yards out of Justin Fields.
243 rushing yards total. Like, that's insane. But again, they have the personnel to do it. You've got David Montgomery, you've got Khalil Herbert, and then you have this quarterback who not only is comfortable running though, but wants to. Justin said after the game, which I found it interesting, he was like, I knew going into this game that I didn't want to get hit anymore. I didn't want to take a lot of hits. So I knew I was going to run the ball more. And I thought that was very interesting. Like, that's his comfort zone. That is, if he knows he's getting the ball and he has those design runs, which is way more, the Bears deployed that way more than they had all season. That's like a comfortability thing for him. And it meant that his internal clock didn't get sped up throughout the game. It meant that when he did sit in the pocket, he trusted it because he knew that he could take off if he needed to. Mm-hmm. And that he also knew that this offensive line was capable of blocking for him because they could do it when they knew he was going to run. So I just think that it added, again, so much more to this offense. It made it so much more dynamic. And it's a deviation from, listen, 3 of the 4 teams in this division run the same offense. Yeah. And it's not, and I feel like up until this point, Luke Getsy being a first-time play caller and having his experience in Green Bay with Aaron Rodgers, he was trying to somewhat fit Justin Fields into an Aaron Rodgers-sized hole. And that wasn't working, obviously, because Justin Fields and Aaron Rodgers are not the same player, never were the same player, won't be the same player. So what Luke Getsy and the coaching staff have done in this 11-day break that the Bears just had, I mean, they have 2 bye weeks this season, essentially. They were able to incorporate things and identify things that made Fields feel comfortable that maybe weren't a part of this offensive scheme, because these design runs for quarterbacks aren't part of this scheme, and figure it out.
That it wasn't there in the first place.
Yeah, wild, right? Because you knew that Fields was a runner and you knew that he could be a runner. And that doesn't discount what he can do as far as like launch a deep ball. I think he was super accurate on the run yesterday in those scramble drills, and he made things happen. He got first downs by any means necessary, but you fall back to your, lowest or the highest level of training that you have. And Justin's a runner. And so I think you need more of that. And then I think this defense has steadily been getting a lot better week in, week out. You saw 4 takeaways from this defense, 2 interceptions from both of the rookie draft picks, rookie second round picks. And I think that they're building, and you're seeing these building blocks finally, and you're finally seeing tangible improvement. But it definitely, I think they had the element of surprise on their hands too, which maybe they're not going to now, because even Belichick said it after the game. He did not expect that many design runs out of Justin Fields, though he could do it. So I think that there was an element of surprise. I don't want to get Justin Fields said it after the game too, don't get too high on this win. And I think that that's the case, but just keep doing what you're doing, man. And I honestly, Bears fans have been so funny. I grew up in the suburbs of Chicago.
Oh, okay.
So I've been in this market. I know these fans very well, but it's just funny because I feel like just a little ounce of success. They're so thirsty for a good team in that town that they want to grab onto it and just like never let it go. So like the week 1 win against the 49ers, I keep saying, was probably the worst thing to happen, because I thought we went into the season knowing who the Bears were and what they were building, and that maybe they shouldn't have any expectations of them this year. But now, like, I feel like people had finally come back down and we're like, all right, yeah, it's a building year. We're just going to muster, like, wade our way through it. And now you get this big win on Monday Night Football against the New England Patriots and that defense. And now I'm like, oh God, let's not. We're still building. They're still building, but
it's still a clear the cap out kind of year. That's what
Yes.
Lauren Cox at Locked On Bears has been talking to me
Yes.
a lot about. Like, that this is the point of this year was to fix a whole bunch of problems that Ryan Pace left behind, and then they can really start building.
There was no way that Ryan Poles could turn this all around in his first offseason as a general manager too. Let's not forget, Ryan Poles is a new GM. Matt Eberflus is a new head coach. His play callers, both first-time play callers. Like, you have a lot of inexperience not only on this roster, which is very, very young, but you also have an experience on the coaching staff, and they're kind of learning each other and how all of that trickles down in their communication and what they really want out of this team. But I do see a giant light at the end of the tunnel for this team. I think that they're going to be a vastly improved team after this next offseason, where you have the cap space, you have the draft capital, and you have another offseason of undoing what Ryan Pace did.
Mm. So I do want to get to the Lions. There's one more question I have for you, but we have to keep it tight. I want to get another irresponsible prediction out of you. Is Justin Fields a Chicago Bear in 2025?
Yes.
Yes?
Yeah. Yes.
Okay, let's move on to the Detroit Lions, who you can go, if you bet all three of those, you get the Vikings division, Vikings in the Super Bowl, and then Justin Fields stays a Bear. That's, and it's recorded. You can circle back. I'll send you the clips. The Detroit Lions were so lovable, and then they won one game. Only team in the NFC North to beat the Commanders, which is very funny. But
it's par for the course.
Where do we go from it? Where does Dan Campbell have, like, 3 wins? Is Dan Campbell going to survive the season?
I hope so, because from a player's standpoint, I know all those players love playing for him. I know all those coaches love coaching for him. He's a very easy guy to get behind. He has some experience on his staff, and he has a lot of former players who I think that, they can obviously relate to the current players in a lot different manner than you can if you didn't play at that level. But where they go from here, I'm scared for them. Honestly, I picked them to get to 7 wins this year, and that was a prediction that I think has gone horribly wrong, because if you look now what their schedule looks like,
they're over. I got caught up in it.
Murderer's row all of a sudden. Like the Dolphins, you've got like all the teams that you thought maybe they could eke by wins like pretty easily, like the Dolphins, the Jets, whatever. Like, those are all good teams now. I think I had pulled up their schedule just to reinforce this, but it was, let me see. Yeah. So the next game they have is Dolphins, Packers, Bears, which you can't take that for granted anymore. Giants, Bills, Jaguars, then the Vikings, the Jets, the Panthers, okay, the Bears again, the Packers again. Like, that is horrible. The poor Lions.
They're getting the 1 overall pick, aren't they? And then they're going to have a new head coach who gets to pick his quarterback. That's got to be the move, right? Because they're cutting Jared Goff after this season, right?
Yeah, that's the one thing that I think could maybe even save Dan Campbell is, like, all right, you make the switch at quarterback, and then they give you an extra year to figure out what you have. But I mean, that's if you're getting CJ Stroud, that's if you're getting Bryce Young. And I actually did an article about 5 potential draft picks in the first round of the Lions to keep an eye on. And I kind of, with the mindset of, all right, worst case scenario, you're looking at CJ Stroud, you're looking at Bryce Young. Maybe if you're in the middle of the round, you can go with something other than a quarterback, middle to late rounds. And that's if you eke out a few more wins here. But with that those chances looking increasingly dimmer, I think that you can get one of these stud quarterbacks, and then that buys Dan Campbell maybe one more year, and you can see what you have. Because, I mean, this offense was pretty insane the first few weeks of the season. And then the defense after their bye got better, but then their offense completely regressed. So, getting shut out by the New England Patriots isn't
no, especially after what the Bears did to them and all the problems that offense has had. But then I guess turn it around and look at the Commanders. Football's weird. One more before you go, Carmen. Similar vibe to the Justin Fields question. By 2024, let's say the schedule works out where you played 2 games in January in the regular season now, because the season starts later and stuff. Will the Lions play a relevant playoff implicated regular season game for themselves, not like they play a good team in the last season? Will they play relevant January football by 2024? Not great that's hard.
It's hard. It's really hard. Like next year, no. But like I thought that they had taken a step forward this year, and to see that they are still kind of the Lions after all.
So by January 3rd, 2025, which would be like week 16 of the 2014 season.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, you know
17.
what? I want good things for all of the teams in this division. So I'm gonna say yes. Make it a really competitive division. Make the NFC North the powerhouse of the NFL.
Make the NFC North great again. You heard it here first. Carmen, tell me where we can find your work. Fox Sports, where else?
I host a podcast with Adam Rank of NFL Network, this sick podcast, and it's live every Tuesday night at 7 p.m. Central Time, 8 p.m. Eastern. And then I also do some work for CHGO, which is a local Chicago media outlet, and I'm on a couple of their shows a week, but it's a real fun kind of just fan perspective of the Chicago Bears, breakdowns of the Chicago Bears. They have all the local teams there, so that's a lot of fun. And I'm usually on there on Wednesdays and Thursdays. But follow me on Twitter, Carmen V. That's the best way to see what I'm up to.
Great. And if you're watching on YouTube, that's on the screen right under her name. That's Carmen Vitali. Thank you so much for giving me some enlightenment on the Vikings rivals in the NFC North.
Thanks, Luke.
Thanks again to Carmen Vitali for giving us some time here on the Locked On Vikings podcast. Tomorrow is Crossover Thursday. That means we're talking to Alex Clancy of Locked On Cardinals. We're going to get to know Kyler Murray, and I am extremely excited to learn his opinion on the new Modern Warfare multiplayer coming out this weekend. We'll talk about that and maybe some football, and we'll get right back into the swing of things. Vikings football is back. Bye week's over, baby. We'll talk to you then. And as always, Skull.